Dust swirled around Lily's feet as the transport vehicle rumbled away, leaving her alone before the massive stone gates. The fortress stretched up into the cloudy sky like a mountain made by hands instead of nature. Dark towers twisted toward the heavens and strange symbols were carved deep into the black stone walls. She had never seen anything so big or frightening in her entire life. Lily clutched her small bag tighter and walked toward the entrance. Her heart beat fast in her chest. 3 months ago, she had been working in the food gardens back home. Now she was here, chosen to serve in the house of Lord Dracon himself. The other humans in her village had looked at her with pity when the selection came. Nobody wanted to work for the Dragon Lords. The Vorthak had ruled Earth for 30 years now. Lily was born after the conquest, so she had never known freedom the way the older humans talked about it. To her, the tall reptilian beings with their scaled skin and burning eyes were simply the masters. Some were cruel, others less so, but all were powerful beyond imagination. A smaller door in the great gate opened with a loud creak. A hunched human woman stepped out, her gray hair tied back in a tight knot. She wore the simple brown clothes that marked her as a house servant. "You must be the new girl," the woman said in a tired voice. "I am Rose. I run the human staff here. You will do exactly what I tell you, when I tell you, or you will not survive a week in this place." Lily nodded quickly. "Yes, ma'am. I understand." Rose looked her up and down with sharp eyes. "Maybe you do, maybe you don't. Come along. Lord Dracon expects his servants to be useful from the first day." They walked through corridors that seemed to go on forever. The walls were covered with strange artwork showing battles between creatures Lily did not recognize. Everything was built for beings much larger than humans. The doorways towered above her head, and the stairs were so tall she had to stretch her legs to climb them. "You will work in the medical wing," Rose explained as they walked. "It is quiet there. The Vorthak do not like to be reminded of weakness or injury. You will clean, prepare medicines, and assist the healers when needed." They passed several Vorthak guards along the way. Each one stood nearly 8 feet tall, with thick scales covering their bodies and long tails that swished behind them. Their faces were elongated like dragons from old human stories, with sharp teeth and glowing amber eyes. Lily tried not to stare, but she had never been so close to them before. The medical wing was in a separate tower, connected to the main fortress by a covered bridge. It was quieter here, just as Rose had said. The smell of strange herbs and medicines filled the air. Rose showed Lily to a small room with basic furniture. "This is where you will sleep," Rose said. "Meals are at dawn, midday, and sunset in the servants' hall. Do not be late. Do not speak unless spoken to by a Vorthak. Do not touch anything unless instructed. Do not enter any room marked with red symbols." Lily memorized every word. She had heard too many stories about servants who made mistakes and disappeared forever. The next morning, Lily began her work. She swept floors, washed medical tools, and organized supplies. The Vorthak healers largely ignored her, which was fine by her. She learned that most injuries here came from training accidents and fights between the dragon-like beings. Their medicine was advanced but strange, using crystals and energy fields alongside more familiar herbs and bandages. On her 3rd day, while carrying clean linens to storage, Lily heard a soft sound from behind a door at the end of the hall. It sounded almost like crying, but deeper and more resonant than any human voice. She paused, listening. The sound came again, filled with such sadness that it made her chest ache. The door had no red markings. Lily knew she should walk away, but something about that lonely sound pulled at her heart. She had always been too curious for her own good. Her mother used to say it would get her in trouble someday. Lily knocked softly on the door. The crying stopped immediately. "Hello?" she called quietly. "Is someone hurt in there?" Silence stretched for long moments. Then a voice answered, speaking in the human language but with the deep musical tones of the Vorthak. "Go away, human. No one is supposed to be here." The voice sounded young and tired. Lily should have left, but instead she found herself saying, "I work in the medical wing. If you're injured, maybe I can help." A bitter laugh came from inside the room. "No one can help me. Leave before you get in trouble." Lily bit her lip. Every smart part of her brain screamed to walk away. But the sadness in that voice reminded her of her younger brother when he was sick. She had always been the one to take care of others. "I'm going to come in," she said softly, "just to check that you're all right." Wait, no, but Lily was already pushing open the door. The room beyond was larger than her entire sleeping quarters, with wide windows that let in streams of golden sunlight. Medical equipment lined one wall, and a massive bed sat in the center. On that bed, propped up by pillows, was a young Vorthak unlike any she had seen before. He was smaller than the adults, probably no older than herself in equivalent years. His scales were a deep blue-green color that shimmered in the light. But what shocked Lily most was his eyes. Instead of the usual burning amber, they were a soft purple color, filled with intelligence and pain. "You should not be here," he said again. But his voice was gentle now, not angry. Lily noticed that thick blankets covered him from the waist down, and there were no servants or attendants in sight. Everything about the room felt forgotten and abandoned despite its rich furnishings. "My name is Lily," she said, staying near the door in case she needed to run. "What's yours?" The young Vorthak studied her for a long moment. "I am Kale," he said finally. "Son of Lord Dracon, though he would prefer people forget that fact." Lily took a small step closer. "Why would he want people to forget?" Kale's laugh was bitter again. "Because I am broken, human. My legs do not work. In Vorthak society, weakness is the greatest shame. I bring dishonor to our family name simply by existing." Understanding hit Lily like a cold wave. This was why the room felt so isolated, why no one came here. The mighty Lord Dracon was hiding his disabled son away from the world. "That's terrible," Lily said without thinking. "You're not broken. You're just different." Kyle stared at her in shock. "You dare speak so casually to me. Do you not fear punishment?" Lily realized she probably should be afraid, but looking at this lonely young being, all she felt was sympathy. "Everyone deserves kindness," she said simply. "Even princes." For the first time since she entered the room, Kyle smiled. Rain drummed against the tall windows of the medical wing as Lily finished her morning duties. 3 weeks had passed since she first met Kale, and she found herself looking forward to their brief conversations more than anything else in her day. What started as quick check-ins had grown into longer talks whenever she could slip away from her other work. Today she carried a small book hidden under her cleaning rags. It was an old collection of human stories that she had brought from home, one of the few personal items servants were allowed to keep. She had noticed that Kale's room contained many Vorthak texts about warfare and politics, but nothing that might simply be enjoyed for pleasure. "Good morning, Kyle," she said softly as she entered his room. The young prince was sitting up in bed, staring out at the gray sky with those unusual purple eyes. "Good morning, Lily," he replied, and she could hear the genuine happiness in his voice. It made her heart warm to know that someone looked forward to seeing her. She went through the motions of checking his room, straightening things that were already tidy. The Vorthak healers came by twice a day to monitor his condition, but they spoke to him like he was an object rather than a person. They never stayed long. "I brought something for you," Lily said when she was sure no one else was nearby. She pulled out the small book and held it up. "Stories from my world. Would you like me to read one?" Kale's eyes lit up with interest. "You would do that? But surely you have other duties." Lily settled into the chair beside his bed. "Everyone needs stories," she said. "They help us remember that there's more to life than just work and duty." She opened to a tale about a young human who befriended a wild bird with a broken wing. As she read, she watched Kale's face transform with wonder. He had clearly never heard anything like these simple stories before. His education had been all about military strategy, political theory, and the harsh realities of leadership. The human helped the bird even though he gained nothing from it. Kale asked when she finished. "That's what makes it a good deed," Lily explained. "Helping someone because you care, not because you expect a reward." Kale was quiet for a long moment. In Vorthak culture, every action must have a purpose that strengthens the family or the empire. Acts done only from kindness are seen as foolish. "Maybe that's why your people are always at war," Lily said gently. "When you only think about strength and gain, you forget what you're actually fighting for." It was a bold thing to say, criticizing Vorthak society to one of their princes. But Kyle nodded thoughtfully instead of taking offense. "I have wondered about that myself," he admitted. "From this room I have heard my father and his generals plan battles for worlds we do not need, against peoples who never threatened us. But when I asked why, they said a true warrior does not question the need for conquest." Over the following days, their conversations grew deeper. Lily shared more human stories and ideas, while Kale told her about Vorthak history and culture. She learned that his people had once been peaceful, living in harmony with the natural energy fields of their homeworld. But centuries of war with other alien races had hardened them into the conquering force that now ruled dozens of worlds. "You would have liked the old ways," Kale said one afternoon. "Vorthak used to value wisdom and artistic expression as much as military might. My great-grandmother was a poet who could make energy crystals sing with her words. What happened to change that?" Lily asked. "Fear," Kale said simply. "When other species began expanding across the galaxy, our leaders decided that the only way to survive was to become the strongest. They believed that showing any softness would make us targets." Lily thought about her own world and how quickly it had fallen to the Vorthak forces. "Maybe they were right about being strong," she said. "But they forgot that there are different kinds of strength." Their friendship did not go unnoticed. Other human servants began to whisper about the girl who spent too much time in the forgotten prince's room. Some warned her to be more careful, while others accused her of trying to gain favor through inappropriate means. Rose confronted her one evening as Lily was preparing to retire to her room. "You are playing a dangerous game, girl," the older woman said, her weathered face stern with worry. "The Vorthak do not tolerate servants who overstep their bounds." "I'm just being kind to someone who needs kindness," Lily replied. "Kind?" Rose's voice rose in pitch. "Child, these creatures conquered our world and enslaved our people. That thing you're coddling is the son of the beast who ordered the destruction of entire human cities. Have you forgotten who you are?" Lily felt anger flare in her chest. "Kale never hurt anyone. He was just a child when Earth was conquered, and he's been locked away in that room ever since. How is punishing him with loneliness going to help our people? Because he is not our people," Rose hissed. "No matter how pitiful he seems, no matter how he speaks to you, he is still one of them. His blood carries the same cruelty that destroyed our world." But Lily shook her head. "You're wrong. I've seen his heart. He questions the violence just like we do. He dreams of a better way." Rose stared at her for a long moment, then sighed heavily. "You are young and naive. But mark my words, this compassion of yours will bring nothing but trouble. The other Vorthak nobles have begun to notice your behavior. Soon they will demand action be taken." That night Lily lay awake thinking about Rose's warning. She knew the older woman was probably right about the danger. But every time she remembered the loneliness in Kale's eyes that first day, or the way his face lit up when she brought him a new story, she knew she could not abandon him. The next morning brought proof that Rose's fears were justified. As Lily entered the medical wing, she was stopped by two Vorthak guards. They were even larger than the usual soldiers, with deep red scales and scars marking their faces. "Human servant," one of them rumbled in heavily accented human speech. "You will come with us." They escorted her to a small chamber where a Vorthak noble waited. This one wore rich robes marked with symbols of high rank. His amber eyes burned with cold intelligence as he studied her. "I am Commander Vel," he said in perfect human language. "I oversee security for Lord Draken's household. It has come to my attention that you have been spending unusual amounts of time with the young prince." Lily's mouth went dry, but she forced herself to speak steadily. "I perform my cleaning duties in his room, sir, as assigned." "Cleaning duties that require you to sit beside his bed for extended periods? Cleaning duties that involve bringing unauthorized materials into his quarters?" Commander Vel's tail lashed behind him with irritation. "Do not insult my intelligence, human. I know exactly what you have been doing." Fear crept up Lily's spine, but she lifted her chin defiantly. "I have been showing kindness to someone who is lonely. If that is a crime, then I am guilty." Commander Vel studied her for a long moment. "Kindness," he repeated, as if the word tasted strange in his mouth. "You risk punishment to show kindness to a member of the very species that conquered your world." "Yes," Lily said simply. Something flickered in the commander's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or even a trace of respect, but his voice remained cold and official. "Your behavior ends now," he said. "You will perform only your assigned duties. You will not speak to the prince beyond what is absolutely necessary. You will remove whatever influence you have placed upon him and return him to proper Vorthak thinking. Do you understand?" Lily's heart sank, but she nodded. "I understand." "Good. Because if these unauthorized interactions continue, the consequences will be severe. Not just for you, but for the prince as well. Lord Draken has little patience for weakness, even in his own blood." As the guards escorted her back to the medical wing, Lily felt tears sting her eyes. She had known this moment would come, but that did not make it any easier. Somehow, in just a few weeks, Kale had become the best friend she had ever had. Now she would have to break that friendship to protect them both. But as she approached his room for what might be the last real conversation they would ever have, Lily realized something that surprised her. The kindness she had shown Kale had changed her too. For the first time since arriving at the fortress, she felt like she truly mattered to someone, and that feeling was worth whatever punishment might come. Snow fell thick and heavy outside the fortress walls, blanketing the world in white silence. Winter had come early and harsh to this part of the planet, and the ancient stone buildings struggled to keep out the bitter cold. Lily pulled her thin servant's cloak tighter as she hurried through the corridors with her daily supplies. 2 months had passed since Commander Vel's warning, and Lily had tried her best to obey his orders. She performed her cleaning duties in Kale's room quickly and silently, speaking only when absolutely necessary, but she could see the pain in his purple eyes each time she refused to meet his gaze or answer his gentle questions about her day. The forced distance hurt them both, but Lily knew it was necessary. She had heard whispers that Lord Dracon himself had grown suspicious of the changes in his son's behavior. Kale had begun questioning military strategies during his required lessons, asking uncomfortable questions about the purpose of their conquests. His tutors complained that he showed more interest in philosophy than warfare. Today, however, something was different. As Lily entered Kyle's room with fresh linens, she immediately noticed that he looked unwell. His usually vibrant blue-green scales appeared dull and faded, and his breathing seemed labored. "Good morning," she said formally, keeping her voice neutral as she had been trained to do. Kale managed a weak smile. "Good morning, Lily. Beautiful snow today, is it not?" She glanced at him while sorting the linens. His eyes were too bright, and she could see a slight tremor in his hands. "Are you feeling well, Prince Kyle?" "Just tired," he said. But even speaking those few words seemed to exhaust him. Lily finished her work as quickly as possible and left the room, but worry gnawed at her throughout the day. When she returned that evening for her final check, Kale was worse. His breathing was shallow and rapid, and his scales had taken on an unhealthy gray tinge. "Prince Kale," she said softly, moving closer to his bed, "I think you have a fever." He tried to focus on her face but seemed to be having difficulty. "The room is spinning," he whispered. "And I am so cold." Lily felt his forehead with the back of her hand, the way her mother had taught her to check for sickness. His skin was burning hot despite his complaints of cold. This was serious, possibly life-threatening. "I need to get the healers," she said, turning toward the door. "No." Kale's voice was weak but urgent. "They cannot see me like this. Father has made it clear that any sign of further weakness will result in my complete exile. He will send me away to die alone rather than allow a sick, disabled son to shame the family name." Lily stopped in her tracks. "But you need medical attention. You could die without treatment." "Better to die here than live in exile," Kale said, his voice barely audible. "At least here I have one friend." The way he said it broke Lily's heart. Even delirious with fever, he was thinking about their lost friendship. She had been so focused on protecting them both from punishment that she had forgotten what truly mattered. "I am still your friend," she said firmly, "and friends do not let friends die alone." Over the next hour, Kale's condition rapidly deteriorated. His fever climbed higher and he began drifting in and out of consciousness. Lily tried to cool him with damp cloths, but she knew he needed the advanced medical treatments that only the Vorthak healers could provide. The storm outside had grown worse, with wind howling through the towers and snow piling up against the windows. The medical wing felt more isolated than ever, cut off from the main fortress by the covered bridge that connected the towers. Near midnight, Kale's breathing became so labored that Lily feared he might stop breathing entirely. She could wait no longer. Regardless of the consequences, she had to get him to the main medical bay where the emergency equipment was kept. "Kyle," she said, gently shaking his shoulder. "I need to move you. Can you stay awake for me?" His purple eyes opened with great effort. "Lily, what are you doing?" "Saving your life," she said simply. She had never attempted to lift anything as heavy as a full-grown Vorthak, even a young one. Kyle was nearly 7 feet tall and built with the dense muscle and bone structure of his species, but desperation gave her strength she did not know she possessed. First, she positioned the wheelchair that sat unused in the corner of his room. Then, wrapping her arms around Kyle's chest, she somehow managed to pull him into a sitting position. "This is impossible," he murmured, but she could hear a note of wonder in his weak voice. "You cannot lift me." "Watch me," Lily said through gritted teeth. With a surge of adrenaline fueled by pure determination, she managed to get Kyle into the wheelchair. He was conscious enough to help slightly, using his arms to support some of his weight, but the effort left them both breathing heavily. Getting him out of the room was the easy part. The real challenge would be crossing the bridge to the main fortress. The covered walkway was exposed to the wind, and snow had blown in through the open archways, making the floor slippery and treacherous. Lily pushed the wheelchair slowly through the medical wing corridors, her heart pounding with each step. If they were caught, the punishment would be severe. But looking down at Kale's fevered face, she knew she had no choice. The bridge crossing was a nightmare. Wind whipped through the archways with such force that it nearly knocked Lily off her feet. Snow stung her face and made it almost impossible to see where she was going. The wheelchair wheels slipped on the icy floor, and twice she nearly lost control completely. "Lily," Kyle whispered, his voice barely audible over the storm. "Leave me. Save yourself." "Never," she said firmly, adjusting her grip on the wheelchair handles. "We do this together or not at all." Halfway across the bridge, disaster struck. A particularly strong gust of wind caught the wheelchair and sent it sliding toward the side of the walkway. Lily lunged forward, throwing her whole body weight against the chair to stop it from going over the edge. In the struggle, Kyle was thrown from the wheelchair onto the stone floor. He cried out in pain and lay still, too weak to move. The wheelchair had been damaged in the impact and would go no further. Lily looked at Kyle lying helpless on the cold stone, then at the distance still remaining to the main fortress. There was only one option left. Kneeling beside him, she worked her arms under his shoulders and legs. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest as she lifted his full weight, but somehow she managed to get him off the ground. "This is madness," Kyle whispered against her shoulder. "I am too heavy. You are my friend," Lily said, taking one shaking step forward. "And I do not abandon my friends." Step by agonizing step, she carried him across the remaining distance. Her arms felt like they were on fire, and her legs shook with the effort, but she refused to stop. The storm raged around them, but Lily was focused only on putting one foot in front of the other. When they finally reached the main fortress, Lily was running on pure willpower. Her vision was blurred with exhaustion and cold, but she could see the lights of the medical bay ahead. Just a little further, she was so focused on reaching their destination that she did not notice the figure that stepped out of the shadows until a deep voice spoke behind her. "What is the meaning of this?" Lily turned, still holding Kale in her arms, to find herself face to face with Lord Draken himself. The massive Vorthak Lord stood over 8 feet tall, his dark red scales gleaming in the torchlight. His amber eyes burned with an intensity that made Lily's knees weak with terror, but she did not drop Kale. Even faced with the most feared being in the known galaxy, she held on to her friend and lifted her chin defiantly. "Your son is dying," she said, her voice hoarse from exhaustion but steady with conviction. "He needs medical attention immediately." Lord Draken's eyes moved from Lily's determined face to his son's fevered form, then back again. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind howling outside and Kale's labored breathing. "You dare lay hands on a member of the royal family?" the Dragon Lord said, but his voice held something other than anger. Surprise, perhaps, or even a trace of something that might have been respect. "I dare care about someone who needed help," Lily replied. Lord Draken studied them both for what felt like an eternity. Then, without another word, he stepped forward and gently took his son from Lily's exhausted arms. "Come," he said quietly. "The healers are waiting." As they rushed toward the medical bay, Lily caught a glimpse of something in the great lord's eyes that she had never expected to see. It looked almost like gratitude. Morning light filtered through the large windows of the medical bay as Lord Draken stood beside his son's bed, watching the steady rise and fall of Kale's chest. The healers had worked through the night, using their most advanced treatments to break the fever and stabilize the young prince's condition. They assured him that Kale would recover fully, but it had been a near thing. The Dragon Lord's amber eyes moved to the small human girl sleeping in a chair beside the bed. Lily had refused to leave even when the healers tried to send her away. She had curled up in the oversized chair like a child, one hand still resting protectively near Cale's arm. Lord Draken had ruled an empire for over 3 decades. He had conquered worlds, commanded fleets of warships, and struck fear into the hearts of countless enemies. But he had never seen anything quite like what this small human had done last night. She had risked everything to save his son. Not for reward or recognition, but simply because she cared. It challenged everything he believed about human nature and about the natural order of their society. A soft sound from the bed drew his attention back to Cale, whose purple eyes were slowly opening. The young prince looked around in confusion before his gaze settled on his father's face. "Father?" Cale's voice was hoarse but stronger than it had been the night before. "You are here?" "Yes," Lord Draken said, his voice gentler than usual. "How do you feel?" "Better," Cale said, then noticed Lily sleeping in the chair. "Is she all right?" "She carried me so far in the storm. I was certain we would both die." Lord Draken followed his son's gaze to the sleeping girl. "She is unharmed." "Exhausted but unharmed. She saved my life," Cale said simply. "When I was too sick to call for help, when I had given up hope, she refused to let me die alone." Something twisted in Lord Draken's chest at those words. How long had his son been facing despair alone while he focused on affairs of state and conquest? When had he stopped seeing Cale as his child and started seeing him only as a disappointment? "Why did she do it?" he asked, though he was not sure if he was asking Cale or himself. "Because she believes that every life has value," Cale said, struggling to sit up slightly. "Even mine." Over the following days, Lord Draken found himself thinking about those words constantly. He began to observe the interactions between his son and the human girl more closely, but not with suspicion as he had before. Instead, he watched with growing fascination. He saw Lily bring Cale books and stories from her own culture, opening his mind to ideas that went beyond military strategy and political theory. He saw her listen with genuine interest as Cale shared his thoughts about Vorthok history and philosophy. Most importantly, he saw his son smile and laugh in ways he had not done since he was a small child. Through hidden observation panels, Lord Draken witnessed conversations that made him question everything he thought he knew about strength and weakness. "In your human stories," Kyle said one afternoon, "the heroes often succeed not through superior force but through cleverness and compassion. Is this truly how your people see strength?" "Different kinds of problems require different kinds of strength," Lily replied as she arranged fresh flowers in a vase by his window. "Sometimes you need the strength to fight, and sometimes you need the strength to choose not to fight. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is help someone else even when it costs you something. But surely there must be times when force is necessary," Kyle argued gently. "My people learned that lesson when we were nearly destroyed by more aggressive species." "Of course," Lily agreed. "But maybe the real question is not whether force is sometimes necessary, but whether it should always be the first choice. Your people became so focused on being strong enough to survive that they forgot to think about what kind of life they wanted to survive for." Lord Draken felt those words hit him like a physical blow. In 3 decades of rule, no advisor or general had ever dared suggest that their policies might be flawed at such a fundamental level. Yet this human child had identified the core contradiction in their entire civilization with startling clarity. He began to notice other changes throughout the fortress. Word of Lily's dramatic rescue had spread among the human servants, and their behavior was subtly shifting. They walked with straighter backs, spoke with more confidence, and showed small acts of courage that would have been unthinkable before. One day, Lord Draken observed a human kitchen worker stand up to a Vorthak guard who was bullying younger servants. The human did not fight or resist directly, but simply placed himself between the guard and the children, willing to accept punishment to protect them. The guard, confused by this unexpected display of protective courage, backed down rather than escalate the situation. Similar incidents began occurring throughout the fortress. Humans who had previously been passive and fearful started showing quiet acts of defiance and mutual support. They were inspired by Lily's example, learning that there were ways to be strong that did not require weapons or violence. Even more surprisingly, some of the younger Vorthak began to take notice. Lord Draken overheard 2 junior officers discussing the human girl who carried the prince with something approaching admiration. "Can you imagine?" one of them said. A creature barely half our size with no natural weapons or armor, choosing to risk death for someone who could never repay the debt. It makes no tactical sense, the other agreed. But there is something impressive about such determination. These changes did not go unnoticed by the traditionalist faction among the Vorthak nobility. Commander Vel approached Lord Dracon privately to express his concerns. "My lord," Vel said, his voice carefully neutral, "the humans' influence is spreading beyond your son. The servants are becoming unpredictable. Some of my guards report difficulty maintaining proper discipline." "Elaborate," Lord Dracon said, though he suspected he knew what Vel meant. "They question orders more frequently. They show solidarity when one of their number is punished. Yesterday, a cleaning woman asked one of my lieutenants if he truly believed that might makes right, or if he simply followed orders because he was afraid to think for himself." Lord Dracon almost smiled at that. "And how did the lieutenant respond?" "He was so flustered that he forgot to punish her for insubordination," Vel admitted. "My lord, this human girl's example is causing the servants to forget their place. If this continues, it could undermine the entire hierarchy that maintains order in your household. Or," Lord Dracon said thoughtfully, "it could lead to a better kind of order. One based on respect rather than fear." Commander Vel stared at him in shock. "My lord, surely you do not mean to suggest—" "I mean to suggest nothing," Lord Dracon interrupted. "But I will observe and I will think. Those are privileges that come with rank, are they not?" That evening, Lord Dracon visited his son's room openly for the first time in years. Lily was there as usual, reading aloud from one of her books. She stopped immediately when she saw him and rose to bow, but he gestured for her to remain seated. "Continue," he said, settling his massive frame into a chair that groaned under his weight. "I am curious to hear this story." The tale was about a young human who discovered that the person he thought was his enemy was actually trying to protect him from a greater threat. It was a simple story, but it spoke to themes of understanding, forgiveness, and the danger of assumptions. When Lily finished reading, Lord Dracon sat quietly for several minutes, processing the story's message. "In your culture," he said finally, "is it common for enemies to become allies?" "It happens sometimes," Lily said carefully. "Usually when they realize they want the same things, or when they learn to see each other as people instead of just threats." Lord Dracon looked at his son, who was watching the conversation with bright, interested eyes. For the first time in years, Kyle looked truly alive and engaged. "What do you think, my son?" the Dragon Lord asked. "Could enemies become allies?" "I think," Kyle said slowly, "that most enemies start as strangers who never learn to understand each other. If you can find common ground, if you can see past fear and prejudice, then almost anyone can become an ally." Lord Dracon nodded thoughtfully. "And what common ground might exist between our peoples?" "We both want to protect the ones we love," Kale said without hesitation. "We both want to build something lasting and meaningful. We both want our children to inherit a better world than the one we were born into." Simple desires, Lord Dracon mused, yet perhaps the most important ones. As he left his son's room that night, Lord Dracon felt something shifting deep in his worldview. For 30 years he had ruled through strength and fear, believing it was the only way to maintain order and protect his people. But watching a small human girl risk everything for compassion had shown him that there might be other paths to strength. The question now was whether he had the courage to explore them. The War Council chamber buzzed with tension as representatives from the rival house of Korax filed into the Great Hall. Their leader, Lord Korax himself, was a massive Vorthak with battle-scarred scales and cold silver eyes. He had come to challenge Lord Dracon's right to rule, claiming that weakness in the bloodline made him unfit to lead their people. Lily pressed herself against the stone wall outside the chamber, trying to stay invisible while she listened to the proceedings. As a servant, she had no right to be anywhere near such an important meeting, but she was desperate to know what was happening. The fate of everyone in the fortress hung in the balance. "Lord Dracon," Korax's voice boomed through the hall, "your rule has grown soft. You allow humans to influence your household. Your own son questions the warrior traditions that made our people strong. This weakness spreads like a disease, making us vulnerable to our enemies." Through a crack in the door, Lily could see Lord Dracon sitting on his throne-like chair at the head of a massive table. His expression was calm, but she could sense the tension in his posture. State your challenge clearly. Corax, Lord Draken said in a level voice. I challenge your fitness to rule based on the weakness of your bloodline, Corax declared. Your disabled son is proof that your genetic line is flawed. A true leader would have eliminated such weakness for the good of the species. Instead, you coddle him and allow a human pet to fill his head with alien philosophies. Lily felt anger burn in her chest at the casual cruelty of those words. How could anyone speak of Kale? Brilliant and kind Kale as something that should be eliminated. Furthermore, Corax continued, I have evidence that this human has been teaching your son to question our military strategies and conquest policies. She has corrupted him with human ideas about mercy and restraint. Such influences make him dangerous to our future. Lord Dracon's amber eyes flashed dangerously. My son's education is my concern, not yours. Not when it affects the security of our empire, Corax shot back. I demand trial by combat to prove that strength, not weakness, should guide our people. When I defeat you, I will cleanse your household of these corrupting influences and return us to proper Vorthak values. A murmur ran through the assembled nobles. Trial by combat was an ancient tradition, rarely invoked but impossible to refuse when properly challenged. Lord Drakon would have to fight Corax in single combat, and the winner would rule both houses. But Lily knew something that the nobles did not. Lord Drakon had been injured in a recent skirmish with space pirates. His left arm was still healing, and he moved with slight stiffness that suggested internal injuries as well. Against a younger, uninjured opponent like Corax, his chances of victory were slim. I accept your challenge, Lord Drakon said formally. The trial will take place at dawn tomorrow. As the council disbanded and nobles filed out of the chamber, Lily slipped away to find Kale. She found him in his room, staring out at the courtyard where preparations for the combat trial were already beginning. You heard? He asked without turning around. Yes, Lily said, settling into her usual chair beside his bed. Kyle, your father is injured. He cannot win this fight in his current condition. I know, Kale said quietly. And when Corax defeats him, he will destroy everything we have built here. He will execute you as a corrupting influence, exile me as a genetic failure, and turn this fortress back into a place of pure fear and brutality. They sat in somber silence for several minutes, both lost in their own thoughts. Then Kale suddenly turned to face her with bright, determined eyes. Unless we find another way, he said. What do you mean? The challenge is based on proving strength versus weakness, Kale explained, his mind clearly racing through possibilities. But what if we could prove that the kind of strength Corax represents is actually inferior to the strength my father has developed through your influence? Lily frowned, not understanding. How could we possibly prove that? By showing that wisdom and strategy can defeat pure brutality, Kyle said. Lily, I have been studying our military records and tactical reports. I have also been analyzing the philosophical principles you have taught me about human problem-solving approaches. I believe I have identified fundamental flaws in Corax's military thinking. But you cannot speak at the trial, Lily pointed out. You are not considered a warrior, and your status as disabled means you have no voice in matters of combat. No, Kale agreed. But you could speak for me. Lily stared at him in shock. Kale, that is impossible. Humans are forbidden from speaking in war councils, especially about matters of strategy. The punishment would be death. The punishment for losing this trial will also be death, Kale said grimly, for both of us and for many others who have begun to embrace the changes we represent. At least this way, we might have a chance to save them. Over the rest of the day, they worked together frantically to develop a plan. Kale analyzed battle reports and tactical data, identifying patterns in Corax's approach to warfare that revealed critical weaknesses. Meanwhile, Lily helped him think through how to present these insights in ways that would make sense to the assembled Vorthak nobles. Corax wins through overwhelming force, Kale explained as he showed her tactical diagrams. He commits all his resources to direct confrontation, leaving no reserves for unexpected situations. His victories are impressive, but they come at enormous cost in lives and equipment. And your father's approach is different? Lily asked. Father has begun to value preservation of life and resources. He seeks victories that leave his forces strong enough to defend what they have won. It appears weaker to traditionalists like Corax, but it is actually more sustainable and effective in the long term. They worked through the night, preparing arguments and gathering evidence. As dawn approached, Lily felt sick with fear about what they were about to attempt. But looking at Kale's determined face, she drew strength from his courage. The trial by combat was set to take place in the fortress's main courtyard, with all the nobles and senior household members in attendance. Traditional Vorthak combat was fought with energy weapons and personal shields, a deadly dance of power and skill that often ended in death. As Lord Dracon and Corax took their positions in the center of the arena, Lily moved to a position near the edge of the combat circle. Her heart pounded as she watched the two massive figures prepare to fight. The battle began with Corax immediately launching an all-out assault, trying to overwhelm Lord Dracon with pure aggression. The older lord defended skillfully, but Lily could see that his injuries were affecting his movement. He was gradually being forced back. This was the moment they had planned for. When Corax pressed his attack most fiercely, Lily stepped forward into the arena. "Stop!" she called out in a voice that carried across the entire courtyard. The fighting ceased immediately as every eye turned to stare at her in shock. A human speaking in a trial by combat was unheard of, possibly blasphemous, Lord Corax, Lily said, her voice shaking but clear. "You claim that Lord Dracon is weak because he listens to different perspectives. But what if refusing to consider new ideas is actually the greater weakness?" Corax's silver eyes blazed with fury. "How dare you speak, human?" "Guards, remove this creature immediately." But Lord Dracon held up a hand, stopping the guards. "Let her speak," he said. "I am curious to hear what she has to say." "You boast of your military victories," Lily continued, addressing Corax directly. "But analysis of your battle reports reveals that you typically lose 60% of your forces in each engagement. Lord Dracon's recent campaigns, influenced by discussions about human strategic thinking, have achieved similar objectives while losing only 20% of his forces." Murmurs ran through the assembled nobles. These were not statistics they had considered before. "Furthermore," Lily pressed on, "encouraged by their interest, your approach leaves conquered populations bitter and rebellious, requiring constant military occupation. Lord Dracon's newer methods, which emphasize understanding and integration rather than pure domination, have resulted in more stable, productive territories." "Lies," Corax snarled. "Human trickery meant to confuse the issue." "Then let us test it," Lily said boldly. "You represent the old way of thinking, which sees only force as strength. But true strength adapts and learns. It finds the most effective solution, not just the most violent one." She turned to address the assembled nobles directly. "The human approach that you fear so much is not about becoming weak. It is about becoming wise enough to choose the right kind of strength for each situation. A leader who can only solve problems through violence is not strong. He is limited." The nobles were listening now, really listening. Even some of Corax's own supporters looked thoughtful. "Lord Corax," Lily said, turning back to face the challenger, "if your way is truly superior, then prove it. Not through personal combat, but through demonstration of superior strategic thinking. Let Prince Kale, who has been taught these human principles you despise, analyze your greatest military victory. If he can identify critical flaws in your approach that cost unnecessary lives and resources, will you admit that there might be value in considering different perspectives?" It was a desperate gambit, but it worked. Corax was too proud to back down from any challenge, especially one involving the prince he had dismissed as worthless. "Very well," he said with a sneer. "Let the crippled prince show us his human wisdom. When he fails, both of you will pay the ultimate price for this insolence." Kale was brought to the arena, and with Lily translating his insights for the assembled nobles, he proceeded to dissect Corax's most celebrated victory with devastating precision. He showed how different tactical choices could have achieved the same result, with half the casualties and in half the time. He identified missed opportunities and resource waste that had cost thousands of lives. By the time Kale finished his analysis, even Corax's strongest supporters were looking uncomfortable. The young prince had not just criticized the older lord's tactics, he had exposed fundamental flaws in the entire traditional approach to warfare. Corax stood in stunned silence, his silver eyes wide with shock and growing rage. He had been outmaneuvered not by superior force but by superior thinking, and everyone present had witnessed it. "This proves nothing," he finally roared. "Theories and analysis mean nothing without the strength to implement them." "On the contrary," Lord Dracon said, stepping forward with renewed confidence. "This proves everything. My son has just demonstrated that the influence you consider corrupting has actually made him wiser and more effective than any of us imagined. The human you would execute has helped him develop capabilities that our traditional methods never could. He looked around at the assembled nobles, his voice carrying the authority of absolute conviction. This is the future of our people. Not blind adherence to old ways, but the wisdom to learn and adapt. The strength to change when change makes us better. The nobles began to murmur among themselves, and Lily could see the tide of opinion shifting. What had started as a challenge to Lord Draken's rule was becoming a demonstration of why his approach might be superior. But Korax was not finished. His face twisted with rage as he realized that he was losing not just the trial, but his entire worldview being challenged. "Enough!" he bellowed. "I will not be lectured by a cripple and his human pet. If you will not uphold proper traditions, then I will cleanse this corruption myself." He raised his energy weapon toward Lily, his intention clear. But before he could fire, Lord Drakon moved with lightning speed, positioning himself between Korax and the small human girl. The shot that would have killed Lily struck Lord Drakon instead, and the great dragon lord fell to his knees, wounded, but alive. Around the arena, Korax's own supporters stepped away from him in disgust. He had violated the sacred rules of trial by combat by attacking a non-combatant. "So much for the honor of traditional ways," Lord Drakon said with grim satisfaction as loyal guards surrounded the disgraced challenger. The trial was over and Lord Drakon had won, not through superior force but through superior principles. As healers rushed to tend his wound, he looked at Lily and Kale with something that might have been pride. "It seems," he said with a slight smile, "that I have much to learn about strength." 6 months had passed since the trial that changed everything, and the fortress that had once been ruled by fear now hummed with a different kind of energy. Lily walked through corridors that felt transformed, not by physical changes but by the shift in how people moved through them. Humans stood straighter, spoke more freely, and worked alongside Vorthak guards and officials in ways that would have been unthinkable before. The transformation had not been easy or immediate. Many traditionalist Vorthak had left the fortress rather than accept the new order, while others had taken time to adjust to working with humans as something more than simple servants. But Lord Drakon had proven committed to change, and his word was law. Today marked a special occasion. Representatives from several other Vorthak houses were visiting to observe the new system and consider implementing similar changes in their own territories. The success of Lord Draken's reforms had spread throughout their civilization, sparking debates about the future direction of their entire species. Lily made her way to Kale's room, which had been moved from the isolated medical wing to a suite of chambers in the main fortress. He was no longer hidden away like a shameful secret, but openly acknowledged as Lord Drakon's heir and chief advisor. The change in his living situation reflected the broader transformation in how the Vorthak viewed weakness and difference. "Good morning, Kale," she said as she entered his study, where he was reviewing reports from across their territory. "Good morning, Lily," he replied, looking up from his work with the warm smile that had become familiar over their months of friendship. "Are you ready for today's presentation?" Lily nodded, though she still felt nervous about speaking to such an important audience. Her role had evolved far beyond that of a simple servant. She now served as an official cultural liaison, helping to bridge the gap between human and Vorthak perspectives. It was work that she found both challenging and deeply meaningful. The representatives from the House of Viridian seemed particularly skeptical, Kale noted, indicating a report on his desk. "They believe that our reforms have made us soft and vulnerable to attack. Then we will have to show them that compassion and wisdom can be just as powerful as traditional force," Lily said. "Maybe more so." They made their way to the Great Hall where Lord Drakon was already addressing the visiting delegation. The massive Dragon Lord looked different than he had a year ago. There was less tension in his posture, and his amber eyes held a warmth that had been absent before. The changes in his household had changed him as well. "Honored guests," Lord Drakon was saying as they entered, "I know that many of you have concerns about the path we have chosen. Some believe that working with humans as equals, rather than simply as servants, represents a dangerous weakening of our traditional values." Murmurs of agreement came from several of the visiting nobles. Lady Viridian, a stern-faced Vorthak with deep purple scales, spoke up. "Lord Drakon, with respect, your experiment may work within the controlled environment of a single fortress, but how can such methods protect us from external threats? Our enemies will not be impressed by displays of mercy and cooperation. An excellent question, Lord Draken replied. Perhaps my son and our cultural advisor can address your concerns better than I can. They have been analyzing the practical results of our new approach. Kale moved forward in his wheeled chair, which had been redesigned as a symbol of adaptive technology rather than disability. Lily walked beside him, no longer as a servant but as an equal partner in their work. Lady Viridian, Kale began, his voice carrying the confidence that came from months of being valued for his mind, rather than dismissed for his physical limitations. You speak of protection from external threats. Let me share some data that might interest you. He gestured to Lily, who activated a holographic display showing territorial maps and statistical analyses. Since implementing our new policies, Lily explained, rebellions in our territories have decreased by 70%. Productivity has increased by 40%. Most importantly, intelligence gathering has improved dramatically because local populations now willingly share information rather than actively resisting our presence. These improvements translate directly into military advantages, Kale continued. Our forces can focus on external threats rather than constantly suppressing internal unrest. Our territories generate more resources to support our fleets, and our intelligence networks provide early warning of enemy movements. Lady Viridian studied the data with obvious interest, but her expression remained skeptical. Impressive numbers, but how do we know they will continue? What happens when you face a real crisis that requires traditional strength? We have faced such a crisis, Lord Draken said quietly. 3 months ago, the Nexus Raiders attempted to invade our border territories. In the past, we would have responded with massive military force, accepting heavy casualties to demonstrate our power. Instead, Cal picked up the explanation. We used intelligence provided by loyal human colonists to identify the raiders' base of operations. We employed Vorthak military precision, guided by human strategic thinking to neutralize the threat with minimal losses on both sides. The raiders expected us to follow traditional patterns, Lily added. They prepared for a direct assault that never came. Instead, we dismantled their operations so efficiently that other raider groups have avoided our territories entirely. Sometimes the threat of intelligent action is more effective than the demonstration of brute force. Another visiting noble, Lord Theron, leaned forward with interest. You speak of human strategic thinking as if it were a military doctrine. Can you elaborate? Lily exchanged a glance with Kale before answering. Human strategic thinking emphasizes adaptability, resource conservation, and understanding the motivations of all parties involved in a conflict. We ask not just how can we win, but how can we achieve our objectives with the least cost and the most sustainable results? For example, Kale added, traditional Vorthak tactics focus on overwhelming force applied at the point of greatest enemy strength. Human approaches often suggest finding ways to make conflict unnecessary, or if conflict is unavoidable, attacking the enemy's assumptions rather than their strongest positions. Lady Viridian's tail lashed with agitation. This sounds like cowardice dressed up in fancy language. Does it? Lord Draken asked mildly. Let me pose a question to you, Lady Viridian. You rule 12 star systems with a total population of 3 billion beings. How many of those beings would willingly die for you? The purple-scaled lady paused, clearly caught off guard by the question. My subjects obey my commands because I am strong enough to enforce them. But would they die for you willingly? Lord Draken pressed. Would they fight to their last breath to protect you and your interests? Or would they simply follow orders until it became too dangerous to continue? What does that matter? Obedience is obedience. Lily, Lord Draken said, turning to the human girl, how many beings in our territories would willingly die to protect our way of life? Lily considered the question seriously. Based on the communications we receive and the volunteers who sign up for dangerous assignments, I would estimate that roughly 60% of our human population and 40% of our Vorthak citizens would genuinely risk their lives to preserve what we have built here. That is the difference, Lord Draken said, turning back to Lady Viridian. Your subjects obey you because they fear punishment. Our people support us because they believe in what we represent. When a real crisis comes, which army do you think will fight harder? The visiting nobles exchanged glances, clearly uncomfortable with the implications of this perspective. But Lord Theron nodded slowly. There is wisdom in what you say, he admitted. But implementing such changes The resistance from traditionalist factions would be enormous. Yes, it would, Kyle agreed. Change is never easy, especially when it challenges fundamental beliefs about power and worth. But the alternative is continuing down a path that leads to endless conflict and diminishing returns. Consider this, Lily added, her voice gaining strength as she spoke about something she truly believed in. Every species in the galaxy fears the Vorthak, because you are seen as unstoppable conquerors. But fear breeds resistance and resentment. What if instead of being feared, you were respected? What if other species saw alliance with the Vorthak as beneficial, rather than just inevitable? The girl speaks of fantasy, Lady Viridian scoffed. Species do not willingly submit to those stronger than themselves. No, Lily agreed. But they might willingly cooperate with those who offer mutual benefit rather than domination. Over the following hours, the discussion continued with increasing intensity. Some visitors remained skeptical, but others began to see the potential in Lord Draken's approach. The presentation of data helped, but what really seemed to impact them were the small details they observed throughout their visit. They saw human and Vorthak children playing together in the fortress courtyards. They witnessed the genuine respect and cooperation between species in the daily operations of the household. Most importantly, they felt the absence of the constant tension and fear that permeated traditional Vorthak strongholds. As the day ended and the visitors prepared to depart, Lady Viridian approached Lily privately. "Human," she said, her voice thoughtful rather than dismissive. "You have given me much to consider. Perhaps there is something to be said for your different perspective." "Change is frightening," Lily said gently. "But so is staying the same when the same is not working." Lady Viridian studied her for a long moment. "If I were to attempt similar reforms in my own territory, would you consider serving as an advisor? The transition would require someone who understands both human thinking and Vorthak culture." Lily looked across the room to where Kyle was saying goodbye to other visitors, then back to Lady Viridian. "I am honored by your offer, but my place is here. However, we have been training other cultural liaisons. Perhaps one of them could assist you." That evening, as the last of the visitors departed, Lily found herself alone with Lord Draken in his private study. The great Dragon Lord looked tired but satisfied. "You have done well today," he said, gesturing for her to take a seat across from his massive desk. "Your words carried weight with beings who would have dismissed you as insignificant a year ago." "A year ago I was insignificant," Lily said honestly. "I was just a servant trying to survive. It was your son who helped me understand that I could be more than that." Lord Drakon nodded slowly. "Kale has changed as well. He was dying slowly in that isolated room, not from his physical condition but from believing he had no value. You gave him purpose and hope. In saving his life, you saved his soul." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, both reflecting on how much had changed. Finally, Lord Drakon spoke again. "I have been thinking about the future," he said. "About what kind of legacy I want to leave for my son and for our people. For too long, we have built our strength on the weakness of others. Perhaps it is time to try building our strength on the strength of others." Lily smiled at the wisdom in those words. "I think that is exactly what we have been doing." "Yes," Lord Draken agreed. "And I think it is only the beginning." Outside the windows of the study, the lights of the fortress twinkled in the darkness. But they no longer seemed like the lights of a military stronghold. Instead, they looked like the lights of a home, a place where different kinds of beings could work together, learn from each other, and build something better than what either could achieve alone. The human maid who had once lifted a paralyzed prince out of pure compassion had helped lift an entire civilization toward a new understanding of what it meant to be truly strong. And in a galaxy that had known too much conflict and fear, that was perhaps the greatest victory of all.